you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk to you about AI's ability to transform. Now, as you know, at Deloitte, we work mainly with businesses, but we are very passionate about the democratization of AI, as you will see. And we believe that a lot of the lessons and the trends that we are seeing apply to society equally as much as it applies to businesses. And what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time talking to you about the trends that we are seeing, the global trends in business, and then talk about some of our experiences through the various modalities of AI. So talking about the trends, we've seen a very quick shift in the corporate world from experimenting with AI to actually trying to scale it. From moving from proof of concepts to actually trying to enable the masses, enable employees to use this on a day-to-day basis. And what we have found is that this has been quite a difficult task. And the two main reasons why that is the case is, number one, data, which is a very big topic on its own, which I won't cover today. But what I tell my clients is good data gives you artificial intelligence, bad data gives you artificial incompetence. And that is a universal truth. However, the second reason, and more importantly perhaps, is humans and human nature. What we are seeing with this technology trend, as with others, is that if you look at 100 humans, 40 of them will be what I would call the fearers. People who, don't quite understand the technology, do not trust it, and basically think it's there to replace their jobs and perhaps even destroy humanity. The other 40% are the reverers. They think it's something magical. They think it's going to solve all their problems. They think it's going to transform humanity as a whole, as it is today. And of course, neither of those two groups are true. What you want is a workforce, and I would argue a society, that is the remaining 20% in the middle, kind of understanding that these are great tools, that they can help advance humanity, but they have their limitations, they need to be controlled, and they need to be used responsibly. Now, alongside with the move from proof of concepts to scaling, we are seeing the rise of the digital workforce, or what I would almost call the humanization of AI. And I think there's probably two trends that fit into this category. The first is multimodality. So no longer do we have to sit there and type away in text boxes to interact with this technology, but we can actually talk, which helps in terms of the interaction. And the second aspect is the use of agentic technology. So no longer do you have to engage with this technology on a task-by-task basis, but actually we're seeing agents being created that instead of doing tasks can do the work of, for example, a junior analyst, data analyst, or a junior software developer. And so again, the mundane is going from a task level to a job level. And what we're seeing is that this humanization really has great benefits in some of the use cases that we're seeing in society. So for example, in a number of economies are seeing a great surge in stress and in mental illness. And actually, a lot of the health systems cannot cope with it. And what we're seeing is particularly the youth who have been very affected by this, particularly post-pandemic, are using these tools to interact and are telling them, can you be a psychologist? Can you be a counselor? And are actually using these very effectively. So as these tools become humanized, these use cases will become better and better. The third is around enterprise platforms really embedding this technology. We're seeing it in practically every big enterprise platform that's out there, and even the smaller ones. Now you may say, well, what does that mean for society? Well, in society, as in business, I think we need to come to the realization that the genie's out of the box, and actually prohibiting it in some way is just not possible. Even if you wanted to prohibit it, many businesses who in the very beginning said, right, we're blocking access to all these AI tools, what studies have shown is that employees are even using it without the employer's permission, and are potentially putting sensitive data out on the internet. So really stopping this wave is not an option, but using it responsibly, I think, is. The fourth trend to me is perhaps the biggest contributor to what I would call disparity or disparity in equity in the field of AI. And that is a surge in AI sovereignty, particularly around the use of compute and chips. As you know, there is an arms race going on in this space, and it's not arms and weapons that are being traded and bartered, it is chips and GPUs. You may know that the supply chain in this field is very fragile. At the moment, something like 95% of the chips are manufactured by one company, NVIDIA, and something like 99% of the chips are manufactured in Taiwan. And at this particular moment in time, the demand is far, far outstripping the supply. So many nations are seeing this as a sovereign matter. They want to be in the race of AI. They want to perhaps leapfrog traditional sort of more developed nations in this space. And we're seeing huge orders being placed on what is that limited supply of chips. What are the effects? We're going to see some winners and we're going to see some losers. We had a great panel yesterday where actually one of the ministers from the Global South was talking about how the problem in the Global South is not talent. They have amazing talent in this space. It's access to compute and GPUs. And if Western nations think they are safe, well, what we are seeing is, particularly in my view, nations like in Europe, where we sort of have a false sense of security because we have access to cloud providers and cloud provision. Actually, you may find that if you're a particular government in Europe and you're trying to train those models where the compute is really required, and you need to train them in a particular geographic location because of data sovereignty, for example, you may find that more difficult, the availability more difficult than you would imagine. So we are seeing kind of this becoming a political point in many ways, and we are seeing very big political moves happening. How this will unravel, I don't know, but it is definitely a trend to watch. The last trend that we are seeing at the moment, and of course these things change over time, is the shift towards private and proprietary domain-specific models. Outside of the big large language models, we've seen an explosion of very, very capable, smaller, open source models. What does that mean? It means that actually individuals can train those models for very specific tasks. And when it comes to very, very specific tasks, you don't need a multi-billion or a trillion node model. Much smaller ones work, which is great because it means you don't need that much compute. However, when we talk about that in the business sense, what that also means is that you're not going to have one very large model in your organization. You're going to have dozens and maybe hundreds of them. And so that needs a degree of control because you want to make sure that they're all complying with the guardrails that you set, that they're all being fed with appropriate data, that they're all being updated and patched for security reasons. And that can become a real problem. And if you want an analogy, if you look at spreadsheets and how many spreadsheets we find around businesses today that are a nightmare to control and have data sort of on people's laptops all over the business, CIOs are genuinely worried that this is going to be sort of the next spreadsheet dilemma. But what does that actually mean for society? Well, in the same way that a department head can ask one of their analysts to create one of those models and train them, it's a bit more complicated than that, but not far. Anybody can take those models and train them. So what governance do we need to put around that in society to avoid the misuse of these models that won't have the guardrails that we see in the large models? Now, that said, it is important to say that the large language models, the era of large language models is not over. We're seeing some amazing advancements in the large language model space. I think a lot of us are eagerly awaiting the launch of GPT-5 as an example. And only 3 weeks ago, Google announced its latest Gemini model, which has a 1 million token context window. Some of you might be thinking, well, what is a 1 million context window and why is that important to me? So a context window is the amount of data you can feed into the model for a single context. Typically in a chat app, it's 32,000 tokens. It started off very small, but we can now feed in whole books into these chat apps and actually get a response. With 1 million tokens, you can feed in an entire movie and more. And they demonstrated this by loading an old Buster Keaton movie into this model. And then without any additional training, they asked it, in the scene in the pawnbroker shop, what does it say on the sheet of paper the pawnbroker took out of his pocket? And you know what? Within minutes, this model had identified what a pawnbroker scene looks like, identified the pawnbroker, and read what's on the piece of paper. Now just imagine, some of the horrendous things we heard in the amazing panel we just had. Think about how that can help investigations like that and police investigations. But equally, think about what control we need to put around this capability to avoid it being used irresponsibly to monitor citizens, for example. So with the 5 trends, let's talk a little bit about sort of the capabilities. And I'm not here to kind of announce capabilities because I know that everybody knows them. But text, for example, is still one of the modalities that is used very, very widely. And as I mentioned, we've in Deloitte, we have democratized the use of this technology through a chat app that is proprietary to Deloitte. And we have shared it with all of our employees. So we have 200,000 employees that use this technology every day. And we've seen a huge increase in both the fluency, the understanding, but also the trust in using this technology. So for us, we now have a workforce that is ready to embrace AI and to transform as our use cases become bigger and bigger. But of course, this is not just about democratizing AI in business. We've seen some great use cases early on today around how this technology can be used for people with disabilities. And we are working with charities. We're working with an organization called Costi that helps charities digitize and transform digitally. We're talking to them about how charities can use this. And we've also given our proprietary platform called Paired to one of our charity partners, for starters, called Scope. Some of you may know it's a big disabilities charity. And we're working with them to try and understand how this technology, particularly around text and sort of relatively simple interactions, can be used to help people with both physical and mental disabilities. And one of the things that we are doing that is showing a lot of promise is using this technology for neurodiversity. So many people with neurodiverse conditions actually have great cognitive capabilities. It's just they need to communicate and be communicated to in a particular way. And we're using this technology to act as a neurodiverse translator. And early experiments are showing that this is actually going to be very effective. So we're really, really excited about the work we're doing there. But of course, these technologies aren't just good for text. You will know, of course, that they can produce images. We've seen amazing images. We heard about the horrendous use of images. To me, what strikes me is just how photorealistic these images can be. 2 examples that are actually now relatively old. One was of ex-President Trump resisting arrest in New York. And of course, it wasn't true, but it fooled a lot of news agencies. So if you type that into Google, this is what comes up. On a lighter note, we see the Pope wearing a Balenciaga jacket, which, again, fooled news agencies and went viral and was a gift to Balenciaga's marketing department because the jacket sold out. You'll be surprised how many people want to dress like the Pope these days. But my serious point is that with the ability to create such images and actually just publish them on the internet, okay, these are public figures. But what happens when people start publishing false information around individuals and citizens? And of course, this year is supposed to be a festival of democracy. I think over 40% of the world is voting. So to what extent will this technology be used for false news? And let's not forget, many of our voters today won't read the newspapers and the Financial Times. They're going to be looking at social media. So can we really believe what we see and what we hear? Now, speaking of hearing, as you know, these technologies have made great strides in audio. And by the way, if I was doing this speech about a year ago, I probably wouldn't be mentioning audio that much, but we've seen some amazing strides. On the positive side, it is transforming the music industry. We're seeing huge amounts of actually pretty good music being developed using this technology. And you may identify the image on my left as the Beatles' latest and last single, Now and Then, that used a sample of John Lennon's voice to recreate his voice perfectly, and we can hear it on the single. On the right-hand side, we have iconic English actor Stephen Fry, who also has a very iconic voice. And he was at a forum and announced with some disdain that he had come across a documentary that was using his voice to narrate the whole documentary. And he hadn't given permission for it. He hadn't received a single penny in royalty. Yet they had just cloned his voice from a small segment of a Harry Potter audiobook that he was reading out loud. And to date, I don't think people have been worried about copyrighting one's voice because it's been very personal. But as we have seen, even with the latest release of one of the language models last week, voices can be cloned almost perfectly, and they don't sound robotic. They have perfect human intonations. Moving on from voice, actually one of the biggest areas that we are seeing gains and efficiencies in business is code. This is going to transform code writing and software development in ways that we have never seen before. We're seeing 40 to 60% gains in the development of code. But of course, that's great for the corporate world. What we're also seeing through the use of our own platform, but we're getting the same story from our clients, is that individuals who have never coded before are all of a sudden becoming acquainted with code. So these platforms are recommending, for example, the use of VB scripts to manipulate documents. And so the ability to code is being democratized. But what is great is that this is not just about code generation. What these algorithms are very, very good at is about understanding code and also translating it. So particularly in areas like climate change and climate modeling, where many of the models are actually still written in Fortran, which was invented in the 1950s. And the models themselves are decades old. The challenge is you don't have many people who can still program in Fortran who are in the workforce. Well, these models can be used to look at the code and translate it into something more modern, like Java. Saving huge amounts of time and also managing risk. And by the way, the banks have the same problem. They have millions of lines of COBOL that are critical to the bank, but nobody quite knows what they do, and a lot of the developers have retired, and we're seeing many use cases around that. Last but not least, video. Now again, if I was holding this presentation maybe even as early as three or four months ago, I probably wouldn't be saying much about video. But we have seen huge strides in the use of video generation using simple prompting. And there's lots out there. All the big technology companies have come out with their versions, and they're very, very impressive. But I thought I'd just play you a video, which just in itself, I think, talks about how easy it is to do this. So I showed this to my kids, and they weren't that impressed. They sort of said, well, it's a little bit basic, Dad. But if any of you thinks that this is basic, just remember, this is as bad as AI is ever going to be. And of course, I could go on for a lot longer about use cases. And we've heard some fantastic use cases throughout the course of this conference around how these algorithms are changing biology by predicting protein folding, are able to predict natural disasters a lot more effectively so that we as humans can be prepared. And of course, helping people with disabilities and even advancing nuclear fusion. So for me, I don't see ourselves sitting at an inflection point in just technology. I see ourselves sitting at an inflection point in humanity. And if we learn how to use AI responsibly and for good, we, as individuals, as society, and as nations, can propel humanity forward. Thank you.